Hi, welcome to Box Guitar Tuition. So I've got another classic album inspection for you today. Something a little more contemporary. It's only 25 years old, this, but I think this album was a key album in the career of one of the titans of modern progressive metal, and that's of course Symphony X, New Jersey's Symphony X. This is their third album, The Divine Winters of Tragedy. So originally it was released in November of 1996 on the Zero Corporation album in Japan, but its European release on Inside Out Records was sometime in the March of 1997. So that's why I'm doing it today. I've just picked a random date to put it out, this little video. So what's Symphony X like? The obvious comparison is Dream Theater. I think people need to think, before Dream Theater, progressive metal, to me, there was bands that had progressive influence. You could say there's progressive elements, a lot of progressive elements in early Judas Priest, there's progressive elements in Black Sabbath. Metallica have some progressive elements. Scorpions in some ways, sort of more in a kind of Pink Floyd space rock kind of thing. But I think Fate's Warning would be a band that would define themselves as being more progressive metal. And of course Queensryche, although Queensryche have a kind of focus on kind of catchy songs. They don't have much odd meter stuff, they don't have widdly passages. I think Fate's Warning as well would have odd meter stuff and some conceptual elements, but it's kind of got that main thing. Where Dream Theater differed was they brought in that kind of virtuoso whittle of bands like Rainbow and Deep Purple, fused with fusion bands of the 70s and what Rush were doing, and took it up a notch and had the chunky riff in Metallica. So Symphony X are taking a leaf out of that, but a more power metal. There's more Yngwie Malmsteen influence, particularly in the guitar playing with Michael Romeo. Their literary references are quite sort of classical. They reference, on this album actually, reference some Chopin and Bach. So they're a different beast. And for me, that at some point they kind of become my progressive metal band of choice. I kind of stopped getting Dream Theater albums after a bit. I'll not go into that. It's just, I kind of like the early stuff. But this album opens of Sins and Shadows, so the production's good. It's a good sounding record, but it's kind of a bit cheaper sounding. Symphony X wouldn't have the budget of a band like Dream Theater, and a lot of their recording is done home recording, and it took a while for the technology to catch up with the vision. I'll talk a little bit about it later. But Sins and Shadows is a great opener. It's formed in '58, so I think that shows that the band's prepared to kind of just enjoys doing shorter, punchier tracks, and then they will stretch out on longer tracks. It kind of feels like some progressive metal bands, every track's long, over 6 minutes. Next track, Sea of Lies. I think this illustrates the skill of all the band members. Russell Allen is a great metal vocalist. I think when we talk about, sometimes singers sound a bit like versions of singers of the past. I think Russell Allen's one of the few vocalists, although you can hear Dio and Bruce Dickinson he's singing, he's got his own style. On this album he's singing very much in his sort of what I call his aggressive but still melodic style. Later on he'll do some more gruffer stuff and then go back to his singing style on this album. He's fantastic. He's one of the great metal singers. I've never seen the band live, but I understand also from a mate that he's a really, really excellent frontman as well. So I'm just going to bring this forward a bit. And then Michael Romeo on guitar. In this track, he does an amazing two-handed tapping lick. It sounds like a keyboard, but you realise it's not a keyboard when the keyboard double up to the harmony, and that's Michael Pinella on keyboards. Jason Rullo is on drums. So these guys form the core four of the band. A guy called Thomas Miller's on bass in this album. He leaves after the next album, Twilight and Olympus, and then Michael LePond joins, I believe. So these are all stellar players. They don't, feature in polls often the way the Dream Theater members would do. But if I was picking a comparison, I would say Russell Allen, is a superior singer. Michael Romeo's, he's at the level of Petrucci. He's kind of more neoclassical. In actual fact, Romeo's pretty influential in kind of the YouTube type of playing you see, a lot of his techniques. But it's wrong, it's a lot of competition. I'm not sort of comparing here. It's just that's just trying to kind of give people a picture of what the band's like. Next track's Out of the Ashes. This is only 3 minutes and 40. Again, this would be a sort of Malmsteen type of track, neoclassical influence, double kick drums. Again, it's pretty refreshing. The band's a progressive metal band, but again, they're quite happy just to crank out like a pumping metal track. So the next track, the Accolade, this actually is a kind of sequel to this track, I think, on the Odyssey album, which is kind of 3 albums on from this. This is 9 minutes and 51, so It's got a flowing 6/8 time signature, but they'll have bits where it breaks into 4/4. So it's doing that thing that's popular. Again, Dream Theater do this, where you switch timing. This is really cool. It's got a nice kind of acoustic sort of Randy Rhoads type parts. I think you can hear that in Romeo's work. Good majestic sort of vocals. Again, kind of quite sword and sorcery, bit Arthurian, I think, in its lyrics. So cool track. Next one's pure sort of metal called Pharaoh. Again, just going for the kind of Phrygian dominant sound, beloved of Malmsteen. Proper metal lyric. Again, really enjoyable. And it's the same in the next track, Eyes of Medusa, 5 minutes 26. Again, a little longer, but just cranking out a tune with these typical kind of European power metal lyrics. And I think that's where their market is, more Japan and Europe. I would say describe Symphony X as probably a part-time band, in the sense that I suspect that the other members maybe have other jobs. I think one might work in a music shop. I'm guessing Michael Romeo might teach guitar, do other production jobs. Russell Allen works on lots of other recording projects, like he did Alan Landy with John Landy. He also did an album recently with Annette Olsen of Night, which is actually really good when I've listened to it online. The vocals work well together, so it's well worth checking out. Annette Olsen, Alan Olsen, sorry. Check that out. Then there's the Witching Hour. This starts with a very neoclassical passage. I think it might reference back this. Again, quite Malmsteenish. The vocal melody line on this is very sort of gothic, neoclassical. And then the next track is the title track, The Divine Wings of Tragedy. I think this kind of showcases the sound of the band and the ambition of the band at this time. It has a kind of orchestral choir arrangement at the start, with amazing choral intro with great harmonies. Now I'm not sure if Russell Allen's done all the parts, but there's a lot of vocal parts. And this album on other tracks has a lot of high falsetto harmonies. Now later on they won't do this; they'll just have kind of straighter harmonies. But this time they're experimenting with kind of choral sounding vocals, I guess. So this is split into 7 parts. I think I'm just checking my notes. Yeah, it's based on Milton's Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained, John Frederick Milton. I think those are from the 18th century, those works. I think the poems. You can check it out more. But it also references Holt's The Planner Suite on one part of the music. It's also got a clean bit in the middle where there's kind of like a classic kind of Symphony X type of part, and that's something that Romeo will return to. And then it finishes with kind of like Fantasia, which is probably the weakest track actually. I don't know why they put that track on. How do you follow like a 20-minute epic that's the centerpiece of the album? It feels like the album ends there. So, it's an important album in progressive metal circles, important album in their career. After this, because it did better in Europe for them, I think they had to rush out the next album a bit, which is Twilight and Olympus. And this was why the bass player, sort of checking his name again, Thomas Miller, left, because he didn't want to tour. I could have got something else wrong on another member, so don't quote me on that. But it's a good record. It's kind of shorter. It's only 48 minutes, something like that, which is unusual for Symphony X. All their albums tend to be 60, 65 minutes long. But that's got some really good tracks in that, Lady of the Snow, and so forth. So it's kind of an easier listen. So you could, someone could, if they were checking out Symphony X, they could delve into that as a kind of more palatable listen and then try this. After that album, they did the Odyssey. Now that's the album of they did Chapter 5, New Mythology Suite. Now that's a really popular album with fans, but I don't quite like it as much. I don't like the songs on that as much. Don't know why, that's just my taste. And then after that they did what I think is my favourite album of this era, which was the Odyssey. So the Odyssey's kind of like Divine Wings of Tragedy. It's based on Homer's The Odyssey. It's conceptual. It's got a big 24 minutes piece, like the title track on this album. It's got kind of lots of power metal style mythology lyrics. Russ Allen's still singing really melodically. But the album was slightly let down by the technology, so the band had invested in some kind of orchestration software. But at that point, this is from 2002, it's 20 years ago, the technology hasn't really caught up. Yeah. So what happens is when they get to 2007, they do the Paradise Lost album, Then they've got great samples for their orchestral choir and orchestration samples. And that's when the new Symphony X sound begins, and that album and the two after it are my favourite ones. They've got a different sound from the era before this. So, you know, if I was describing Symphony X, they have the first two albums starting to find their feet, and then there's Divine Wings of Tragedy, Fruit of the Odyssey, and they have, you know, a certain sound that we could take as a whole. Then they kind of adapt that sound with a more modern technology, bigger guitars, bigger orchestration on the Paradise Lost, Iconoclast, and Underworld albums. If I was to suggest to someone if they wanted to check out an album, if they're not checked them out before and they want to go for the newer stuff, the last album, Underworld, is a good place to start, actually. It's got 11 tracks, it's about 63 minutes long, but it's kind of, Russell Allen's singing more melodically on this. He's gone back to that style because the two albums before he was kind of doing a more gruffer, really metal thing. It's a really cool sounding record. Those three albums that I mentioned, Paradise Lost, Iconoclast, and Underworld, they used a co-producer, a mix of albums called Jens Bogram. He's a really good metal mixer, producer, masterer. So Michael Romeo recorded his albums at his home studio, The Dungeon, and then this guy mixed them. And then they're spectacular sounding albums, and it shows you what people can achieve in home studios now. So and the artwork's better as well. The artwork on their early albums is pretty terrible. Divine Wings of Tragedy and Twilight Olympus have got really bad Photoshop covers. And then it gets better with the New Mythology Suite and the Odyssey, but they really come of age with Paradise Lost. They're getting this great digital artist, and they've got really cool packaging. The videos are cool. They've got a bit more money behind them, and things are costing less. So that's that's one of the upscales of the later stuff. But the album I mentioned, Iconoclast, that's a double. If you get the proper edition of that, the full edition, it's like a double album. Now that's a heavy listen, but I think that might be their best record. It's a really intense sort of conceptual album about machines and technology and humanity and stuff. But kind of take your pick. I mean, this band hasn't made a bad record since Divine Wings of Tragedy. I must confess, I haven't actually checked out the Damnation game yet. It's just I haven't got round to that. I kind of dived in at this point. First time I heard him was 2002. A mate of mine said, I found this band Symphony X, and I hadn't heard them before. I kind of dropped out of listening to newer stuff in the 90s, late 90s, and I wasn't aware of what was happening. So that's when I first, he had a live album as well, and a DVD, I think. So I quite like the sound of it, and then later on, it took a few years, but I was like, I'll check out that Symphony X, and took it on from there. So like I said, I've kind of settled on the last three albums as what I really, really like about them. But if you want to go back, a diving point is this album, Divine Wings of Tragedy, 25 years ago, released this month. Obviously, I've kind of digressed on this. I've kind of gone on about the other albums, but I just thought I'd do a kind of little piece on a more modern band that I enjoy with some great playing. And yeah, they're a good sort of counterpoint. You know, if you like Dream Theater and stuff like that, they've got a different take on that sound. Okay, so thanks for checking that out. I'll see you again for some more kind of regular classic album reviews soon. Cheers, thanks.